Climbing through 17,000 feet over Oxfordshire, the left windscreen of a British Airways jet tore away from its frame. The captain was sitting right against it, his lap belt on, but his shoulder harness loosened. In an instant, the pressure inside the cabin shoved him headfirst into the hole. His body folded over the top of the instrument panel and out into the freezing slipstream. He hung there, halfway out of his own airplane, held inside only by cabin crew who refused to let go, and he would stay like that for the next 20 minutes. This was British Airways Flight 5390, the 10th of June, 1990, a BAC One-Eleven, registration Golf Bravo Juliet Romeo Tango, on a routine morning departure. There was nothing wrong with the way it was flown, nothing wrong with the engines, the controls, or the crew. The failure that nearly killed the captain had been built into the airplane 2 nights earlier, on the night shift, by one experienced engineer doing what he believed was a straightforward job. He had replaced the left windscreen, and every single bolt he used to hold it on was the wrong bolt. To understand how that happens, you have to understand a term, self-certification. Under the system British Airways used at the time, certain licensed engineers could carry out a job and then sign it off themselves. One person does the work. That same person certifies it's done correctly. No independent inspector, no second signature, no one else laying eyes on it before the aircraft returns to service. For most tasks, that trust is reasonable. But the engineer on that night shift was the shift maintenance manager, and he'd taken the windscreen replacement on himself and worked it alone. That meant the only check on his work was his own judgment. The windscreen on a 111 is unusual. It's bolted on from the outside, through the frame. Most windows sit inside the cabin, so pressure pushes them back into their seat. This one had nothing but bolts holding it against that push. 90 bolts run all the way around its edge. Replace the window, and you replace all 90 bolts. So the manager needed to know exactly which bolt the manual specified. Instead, he took one of the old bolts he just removed and set out to find new ones that matched it. He was going to identify a critical fastener by sight. Here's why that matters. Aircraft fasteners are defined by a part number, and the part number is everything. 2 bolts can look nearly identical to the eye and still be completely different underneath. A slightly narrower shank, a slightly shorter length, a different strength grade. The maintenance manual lists the exact part number for every position on the aircraft. That specification is the fastener callout, and it exists precisely so that no one has to guess. The manager, though, worked from memory and paperwork. He read a part number off the store's issue note, carried a sample bolt to the parts carousel, and matched the new bolts to the old ones by holding them up and comparing them. When investigators later recovered the bolts, the scale of the error came into focus. Of the 90 bolts holding that windscreen, 84 were a type designated a 211-8C. Their shanks measured roughly 160 thousandths of an inch across. But the windscreen called for the 8D bolt at around 187 thousandths. That's about 26 thousandths of an inch too narrow, a gap you would never catch by eye. The other 6 were the right diameter, but 1/10 of an inch too short to get a proper grip. Out of 90 bolts, not a single one met the specification. On the ground, none of this showed. The windscreen sat flush in its frame and looked perfectly normal, but a pressurized cabin turns every window into a structural part. As the 111 climbed, the cabin was pumped up to keep the crew breathing, and that trapped pressure pushed outward on the windscreen with enormous force. Those undersized bolts were the only thing resisting it. The higher the airplane went, the harder the load pulled on them. Over the town of Ididcut, at around 17,000 feet, they gave way all at once, and the windscreen was gone. What kept the captain alive was the cabin crew behind him. One of the flight attendants reached the flight deck, got a grip on the captain, and held on until the cold and the effort wore him down. Other cabin crew took over, gripping the captain's legs and pinning him against the wind until the aircraft was on the ground. Up front, the first officer was flying from the right seat alone, through a blast of freezing air and noise loud enough to swallow the radios, with a body draped across the instrument panel beside him. He kept control. He declared an emergency, and he brought the 111 down safely. The captain survived. The Air Accidents Investigation Branch published its final report in 1992. It laid out exactly how 90 wrong bolts ended up on a windscreen. The shift maintenance manager had identified the bolt from the store's issue note, then matched the removed bolts by sight rather than consulting the maintenance manual. The report put it down to poor trade practices, poor judgments, and perceptual errors. By every indication, he believed he'd got it right. And that's the uncomfortable part. 26 thousandths of an inch is not a difference the eye is built to catch. Give one person both the job and the signature, and there's nothing left in the process to catch it either. The mistake walked straight onto the airplane. The AAIB issued 8 recommendations, and the most important one reshaped how safety-critical work gets approved. For a job like fitting a windscreen, one engineer's signature is no longer the end of it. Critical tasks now demand independent verification, a second qualified person who checks the work and checks the part numbers against the manual before the aircraft ever leaves the hangar. 90 bolts had been chosen by one man who was sure he was right. The lesson written into the rules afterward was simple. On the things that can kill you, no single pair of eyes gets to be the last one.